Introduction. The Cold Pull, Part 3. The Architecture of Silence. Chapters 29-36. The universe does not whisper, it hums. It is a machine built of frequencies, governed by codes, and patrolled by entities who believe they own the copyright to reality. For years, Jason believed his isolation was a consequence of bad luck, a series of unfortunate events that stripped him of his career, his family, and his home. But as the red filter lifts from the Martian surface, revealing the green truth of a living world, Jason begins to see the same filter lifting from his own life. He is not a victim of chaos. He is a target of order. From the silent, sterile halls of the Masonic Lodges in Maui, where men in aprons unknowingly guard the doors to ancient prisons, to the high-altitude boardrooms where Skunke and the Directorate decide which truths are allowed to trend, the mechanism of control is vast. It is a system designed to keep humanity looking down at their screens, while massive triangular leviathans cruise silently overhead. But the system has a flaw. It cannot account for the human spirit when it refuses to break. In Part 3, the Cold War turns hot. The Syndicate, led by the shadowy Vane, initiates a series of global and local resets designed to neutralize the pilot. They deploy a pandemic to freeze him in place. They weaponize the atmosphere to burn his sanctuary in Lahaina. They even send biological drones, the Greys, to harvest his consciousness from the dream state. Yet, amidst the ashes of a burning town and the silence of a locked-down world, Jason finds his voice. He finds Oggy, the warrior monk. He finds Angel, the co-pilot. And he discovers that the black cube they tried to bury him in was not a coffin, but a cockpit. The fire has cleared the land. The lines are drawn, and the Atlas is waiting for the command. The Cold Pull, Part 3. A sub-story of the Apollo 20 archive. Chapter 29. The Crimson Filter. The fire at the base of the owl statue cracked, sending sparks up into the redwood canopy. The air in the grove smelled of sulfur and expensive scotch. Administrator Holloway, NASA, didn't look at the fire. He was looking at a tablet, his face pale in the flickering light. "The rover is compromised," Holloway whispered. "We scrubbed the feed, but the raw data packet hit the bleak net before we could intercept. They have the geometry, Sterling. They have the face." Double quote. Director Sterling, CIA, took a slow drag of his cigar. He was a man who had survived 6 administrations by never signing anything. "We survived the face in 1976, Holloway. We called it a trick of light and shadow. We released the eroded Mesa talking points. The public bought it because they wanted to buy it. Nobody wants to believe their neighbors are monsters." "This isn't a Mesa," Holloway hissed, sliding the tablet across the rough-hewn table. On the screen was a higher-resolution image from the Cydonia region. It showed a structure, not a rock formation, but a ziggurat. The angles were perfect 51-degree slopes, but the horror wasn't the pyramid. It was what was crawling on it. A massive, segmented coil, half flesh, half corrugated pipe was wrapped around the apex of the pyramid. It pulsed with a bioluminescent violet light. "The cybernetic parasite," Sterling noted, dryly dormant. "The vermis machina. We thought they were its feeding," Holloway said. "It's mining the silica out of the stone structure. It's awake, Sterling." The vibration from the cold pull woke them up. "And the color. Look at the sky." Sterling looked. In the corner of the image, the Martian sky wasn't red. It was a pale, robin's egg blue. Sterling chuckled, a sound like dry leaves breaking. "Ah, the sky problem. That takes me back." The director closed his eyes, and the sound of the redwood wind faded, replaced by the hum of cooling fans and the smell of stale coffee. The architecture of the void. The palm trees didn't move. That was the first thing the president noticed when he stepped onto the terrace of the Palmetto Lodge. The Atlantic breeze was stiff, whipping the tablecloths and the hemlines of the waitresses, but the massive royal palms lining the infinity pool stood perfectly, unnaturally still. "Nanorap," he thought, his left eye twitching with a familiar, localized migraine. "They reinforce the trees. Even the landscaping is armored." He took a sip of his Diet Cola. It tasted like metal, a side effect of the neural pacer installed in his mastoid bone 3 months ago. The device hummed a low C-sharp, a frequency designed to keep his frontal lobe pliable. He wasn't the leader of the free world anymore. He was a biological receiver for a signal originating 3 miles beneath the crust. "Mr. President," a voice oiled with false reverence slid from the shadows. "The architect is ready." The president turned. Standing there was Skunke. He looked exactly as the dossier described, a composite of 2 dead men, stitched together by ambition and life extension therapy. He wore a linen suit that cost more than the education budget of Ohio. His eyes were dead sharks swimming in a sea of milk. "Don't call me that, Zed," the president muttered, the slur in his speech corrected instantly by the implant before it reached his lips. "Not here. Here, I'm just the signatory. We are all signatories to the great work." Skunke smiled, revealing teeth that were too white, too straight. "Come." Skunke is becoming impatient. He wants to show you the Mars render. They walked through the gilded halls of the lodge. It was a fusion of Victorian excess and brutalist bunker architecture. Gold leaf-covered blast-proof concrete. Baroque chandeliers hung from ceilings lined with EMP shielding. This was Mar-a-Lago stripped of its disguise, revealed as the Bohemian Grove of the South, a temple for the high priests of the dying age. They entered the map room. The walls were floor-to-ceiling screens displaying a real-time global surveillance feed, stock markets, troop movements, weather weapon telemetry. At the center of the room, floating above a mahogany table, was a hologram of a red, dusty planet. And standing inside the hologram, manipulating it with frantic, conductor-like hand gestures, was Skunke. The tech oligarch looked manic. His hair was a chaotic implant job, his skin possessing the grayish sheen of someone who slept in a hyperbaric oxygen coffin. He was wearing a black t-shirt with the symbol of a broken chain, the logo of his Mars Link Corporation. "It's not an escape plan," Skunke was shouting at the third man in the room. "Drive. You don't burn the house down until you've backed up the hard drive, Vetus. It's a backup." The third man, Vetus, leaned back in a leather chair, swirling a glass of raw milk. He was the cabinet's health architect, a man with a raspy, damaged voice and the physique of a gym-obsessed ascetic. He represented the biological purge wing of the cabal. "The house is already burning, Skunke," Vetus rasped. "The sewers are crossing the helopause. The cold pull is heating the core. We don't have time to terraform Mars. We need to terraform the electorate." "Gentlemen," Skunke announced, guiding the president to the head of the table seated. "The asset is the president sat." He felt the hum in his skull spike, a command to listen. "Mr. President," Skunke didn't look up from the hologram. He swiped his hand, and the red planet dissolved, replaced by a 3D map of Washington, D.C., but it was wrong. The buildings were there, but the layout was gutted. Entire agencies were blacked out. "Project 2025, Skunke said, his eyes darting with amphetamine intensity. "We've optimized the code. The election is just a user interface event. The backend is already secured." "The polls," the president started, but his voice trailed off. "The polls are legacy media noise," Skunke interrupted, placing a heavy, leather-bound binder on the table. It was stamped with the owl of Minerva. "This is the personnel manifest. 50,000 federal employees, the immune system of the deep state." "We're firing them?" the president asked. "We are formatting them," Vetus corrected, his voice like grinding gravel. "Schedule F isn't a firing protocol. It's an excision. We remove the civil servants, the ones loyal to the Constitution, the regulations, the human element. We replace them with loyalists. Nodes, men and women who have accepted the compliance chip." Double quote. Skunke zoomed in on the map. The Pentagon, the DOJ, the EPA, they all turned from blue to blood red. "Once the human latency is removed," Skunke said, "we can implement the Martian protocol right here. We don't need to go to Mars, sir. We are going to turn America into Mars. A closed-loop, resource-managed, authoritarian biosphere. Efficient, sterile, survivable." "And the descent?" the president asked. He felt a phantom pain in his left hand, the one he used to sign executive orders. The riots. There won't be riots, Vitas smiled, a terrifying expression on his gaunt face. Because by 2025, the food supply will have completed the transition. The seed oils, the microplastics, the frequency-modulated water, the population will be too biologically exhausted to march. They will be tired, sir. So very tired. They will welcome the Mars Protocol because it promises order. Skunke opened the binder. The first page wasn't a law. It was a list of camps was crossed out. Biomass recycling was written in the margins. Re-education, the election, Skunke said softly, is a formality. The algorithms are set. The machines are calibrated to the sealer frequency. You will win, Mr. President. And then, you will resign. The president blinked. I resign. Functionally, Skunke soothed. You will remain the face, the avatar, but the project requires a speed of decision-making that biological leadership cannot provide. You will hand the keys to the AI Governance Council, to Skunke's network. Skunke finally looked up. His eyes were glowing slightly, retinal displays reflecting the red light of the hologram. It's speculative engineering, sir, Skunke said. Democracy is a chaotic system. It wastes energy. We are building a machine that runs on pure will. The 2025 gutting isn't political. It's industrial. We're stripping the copper wire out of the walls of the Republic to build the antenna. The president looked at the three of them. The architect, Skunke. The technocrat, Skunke. The eugenicist Vitas. The unholy trinity of the New World Order. He looked at the hologram. The map of America was slowly turning into the barren, red landscape of Mars. What about the people? The president whispered. The ones who don't fit the algorithm. Skunke closed the binder with a sound like a pistol shot. The sowers are coming, Mr. President. The landlord is checking the lease. We can't have squatters in the hallway when he arrives. Double quote. Skunke slid a single black pen across the mahogany table. It sat there, heavy and cold, catching the light of the false red sun. Sign the executive order, sir. Initiate the gutting. Make way for the red planet. The president looked at the pen. He felt the hum in his skull rise to a scream. His hand moved on its own. He picked up the pen. God forgive us, the president said, his voice flat, robotic. God is just an engineer who left the project early, Skunke muttered, turning back to his simulation. We're just finishing the punch list. The pen touched the paper. The ink was black. The future was red. Flashback, the 20th of July, 1976, Jet Propulsion Laboratories, Pasadena. The room was hot. Men in short-sleeved white shirts and skinny black ties were sweating through their armpits. Cigarette smoke hung in a blue haze over the CRT monitors. Touching down, the flight director announced. Viking 1 has contact. A cheer went up, but it was nervous. This was the first clear look at a new world. The line printer screeched, spitting out the telemetry. The facsimile camera began to build the image, strip by strip, on the main monitor. First, the footpad, then the soil, then the horizon. The room went silent. The soil wasn't rusty red. It was a chocolate brown, flecked with green patches lichen. Primitive, hardy, clinging life. But it was the sky that stopped their hearts. As the scanner panned up, the monitor glowed with a bright, undeniable azure blue. My God, a junior engineer whispered. It's Earth. It looks just like Arizona. Cut the feed. The voice came from the observation deck. The old director, a man whose clearance level didn't have a name, stepped down. He didn't look at the screen, he looked at the engineers. We are not here to find Arizona, the director said. We are here to find a dead world. If it's alive, then there are questions. Questions about who owns it. Questions about who live there. Double quote. He walked over to the color mixing board. The technician, a kid named Carl, was trembling. Sir, the RGB values, the nitrogen dispersion, it is blue. Not for the taxpayers, it isn't, the director said. He reached out with a manicured hand and grabbed the red channel gain knob. He twisted it hard. On the main screen, the image shifted. The brown earth turned a violent, rusty crimson. The green lichen became grey shadows. And that beautiful blue sky, it curdled into a sickly, salmon-colored haze. "There," the director said, stepping back empty. "Do you understand? Mars is the red planet. It is desolate. It is hostile. It is but the biology," the engineer stammered. "The moss on the rocks. Iron oxide weathering," the director said flatly. "Release it. Rust. It's just a rusty rock, gentlemen. Print it. The Grove, present day." Sterling opened his eyes. The memory tasted like copper. "We painted an entire planet red with a single knob," Sterling said. "People that a garden was a desert. We convinced 6 billion we can't use the red filter on this." Holloway pointed at the tablet. "That parasite, it's clearly artificial. It has ports. It has venting. If that image gets out, they'll know Mars isn't a planet. They'll know it's a derelict ship." "Then we initiate the sandstorm protocol," Sterling said, standing up and brushing ash off his suit. "We tell the public a global dust storm has obscured the cameras. We kill the feed." "For how long?" "Until the 2025 project is ready," Sterling smiled, looking up at the stone owl. "We don't need to hide the parasites forever, Holloway. We just need to hide them until we can invite them down here to feed." Sterling's words hung in the open air of the ancient redwood forest, cold and heavy. He tapped the tablet console, and the mesa leak expanded until the screen was dominated by a single, terrifying ocularity. "Not just any parasite either," Sterling said sharply. "Look at the way the jaw is unhinged," Sterling continued, his voice dropping an octave. "That's not geological fracturing. Those are double mandibles, high-density ceramic carbide cutters engineered with a bite force exceeding 30,000 C. They don't just chew, they shear at a molecular level. It was designed to eat through the manganese hulls of its own kind during the Great Desolation." Holloway stepped closer, the light from the monitor reflecting off his green mask. "It looks biblical, Sterling, like something that crawled out of the smoke when the fifth angel sounded his trumpet." "The director thinks exactly that," Sterling replied, pulling up a side-by-side comparison of the artifact and a digitized medieval manuscript. "He calls it the Abaddon Protocol. In Revelation 9, the locusts aren't insects. They're described as having breastplates of iron and the teeth of lions. Look at the chassis on this thing. That's not a rock. That's a manganese silica composite casing fused directly into the necrotic remains of a biological head." Double quote. The director's warning. The screen flickered, and a pre-recorded audio file from the director began to play over a thermal X-ray of the creatures in a sanctum. "If the public sees this," the director's voice crackled, "they won't see alien life. They will see the end of the world. This is a cybernetic sentinel, a vessel built for deep time suffering. The seismic chamber in the base isn't for detecting tremors, it's a nutrient circulation pump. It filters the Martian regolith to keep that biological brain, the pilot, in a state of eternal, oxygen-deprived consciousness. It is a soul trapped in a machine, preserved for a war that ended 1,000,000 years ago." Double quote. "Technical capabilities, the Sentinel's arsenal." Sterling pointed to the vertical ribs along the creature's flared skirt. "These aren't cooling fins. They're infrasonic emitters. It projects a soporific pulse that vibrates the human nervous system into a state of total paralysis. You'd stand there, unable to even blink, while it scuttled toward you on those piezoelectric actuators." "And the fate of this one?" Holloway asked, gesturing to the massive gash that had spilled grey dust, the failed nanites across the Martian sand. "It was gutted," Sterling said flatly. "Locked in a terminal clinch with another sentinel. This isn't just a relic, it's a crime scene. A real-time record of a gruesome fate that NASA's AI scrubbers missed because they couldn't fathom the level of malice required to build such a thing. We aren't just hiding life, Holloway. We are hiding the fact that Mars is a graveyard of monsters." Sterling took the tablet and threw it into the fire. The image of the blue sky and the techno-organic worm curled, blackened, and vanished into smoke. "Mars is dead," Sterling said, pouring another drink. "Keep it that way." Double quote. Chapter 30, The Vesper Descent. The air in the sub-level 9 hangar didn't move. It was heavy with the scent of ozone and chilled liquid nitrogen. Tucked into an unmapped basalt cavern beneath the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Watcher's private base was a masterpiece of orphaned architecture. This wasn't a government facility. There were no flags, no serial numbers, only the low, rhythmic hum of the TR-3B Manta variant resting on its induction pad. The director stood on the gantry, his silhouette framed by the flickering amber lights of the pre-flight diagnostic. He wasn't a man of state, he was a curator of forbidden things. Below him, the three-man team, Thorne, Chen, and Miller, checked the seals on their TLV squid suits. The suits looked like oily, matte black skin, occasionally rippling as the internal nanites adjusted to the room's atmospheric pressure. The craft, the Manta Triangle. As the team ascended the boarding ramp, the Manta didn't feel like a vehicle. It felt like an organism. The hull was composed of a smart metallic glass that was cool to the touch, but vibrated with a frequency that bypassed the skin and resonated directly in the marrow of their bones. The interior atmosphere, it smelled of crushed mint and static. The life support system didn't scrub the air, it resequenced it using a cold plasma field. The feel, there were no rivets, no bolts. The walls curved into the floor in a seamless, obsidian-like sweep. Walking inside felt like stepping into the throat of a great, silent bird. The Tesseract core, exotic geometry. At the center of the pilot's deck sat the magnetic field disruptor, MFD. But the director had modified this unit with Tesseract technology borrowed from a downed Sentinel in the 90s. Technical insight, the core was a rotating ring of mercury-based plasma pressurized to 250,000 atmospheres. However, to the team's eyes, it appeared to fold into itself. It was a three-dimensional shadow of a four-dimensional object. When Miller, the tech infiltrator, reached out to calibrate the navigation, his hand seemed to disappear into the console, reappearing moments later from a different angle. The interior of the craft was larger than the exterior dimensions suggested, a spatial anomaly that allowed the team to carry months of supplies in a space that looked no larger than a cockpit. The departure. "The MFD is spooling to 50,000 revolutions per minute," Miller called out, his voice sounding oddly echoed, as if it were coming from two places at once. "Mass reduction is at 89%. We are weightless in the local grid." The director leaned over the gantry railing, his eyes reflecting the purple glow of the Tesseract core. "Remember," he said, his voice dropping into that chilling, proprietary tone. "The reptilian dumb in the Vesper Deep isn't just a base, it's a biological entity. The Manta will get you to the door, but the squid suits have to convince the door that you belong inside." Double quote. Mission specs, the ghost profile. As the hangar's massive hydraulic floor began to lower the Manta into the flooded launch tube, Thorne caught Chen's eye. They both felt it, the subtle pull of the Tesseract, a tugging on their very souls. They weren't just going to the bottom of the ocean, they were leaving the conventional world behind. "Seal the hatch," Thorne commanded. The obsidian door melted shut, leaving them in the shimmering violet light of the abyss-bound hunter. Location data. Site, Black Ridge Anomaly, Echo 7. Coordinates, 36 degrees 14 minutes, and 22 seconds N, 81 degrees 50 minutes, and 4 seconds W. Elevation, minus 1,450 feet, sub-bedrock hangar. Jurisdiction, unknown / Watcher Sector B. Timestamp. Date, the 14th of August, 2017. Time, 3 hours, 14 minutes, and 55 seconds Zulu, T-4 o'clock to submersion. As the TR-3B Manta cleared the launch tube, the transition from air to water was eerily silent. There was no impact, no roar of displacement. Inside the cockpit, the view through the obsidian hull shifted from the sterile hangar lights to a swirling, bioluminescent indigo. The descent, crossing the Hadal boundary. Miller watched the telemetry. The digital depth gauge was a blur of climbing numbers, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 feet. Approaching the Hadal zone, Miller reported. His voice sounded like it was being filtered through a tin can, a side effect of the Tesseract core warping the acoustics of the cabin. Pressure outside is 8,000 C. The MFD is compensating. Inside, we're still at a comfortable 1 atmosphere. Thorne gripped the control stalks. They weren't connected to the craft by wires, but by haptic induction. He could feel the ocean pressing against the gravity bubble. The Tesseract field is holding, but the geometry is getting tight. The mercury plasma is starting to pulse. Double quote. The deep pressure anomaly. At 20,000 feet, the laws of physics began to fray. The water outside was no longer just a liquid, it was a crushing, supercooled mass that wanted to flatten anything in its path, but the director's borrowed math created a spatial pocket. The visual shift, the water immediately outside the hull began to glow with a pale, Cherenkov blue. This was the frictionless tunnel. The manta was literally vibrating the water molecules out of its path, before it touched them. The Tesseract glitch. Chen, the biologist, looked toward the rear of the cabin. For a split second, she saw the back of her own head. The four-dimensional fold was reacting to the intense external pressure, bending the light within the craft into a closed loop. "Don't look back, Sarah," Thorne warned, his eyes fixed on the sonar itself. "Once we level out, the geometry will fix." The reptilian gate. The sonar suddenly pinged with a frequency that wasn't digital. It was a low, melodic thrum that vibrated the very floorboards. "There it is," Miller whispered. On the main viewer, the abyss opened up. A massive, jagged fissure in the trench floor was bathed in an unnatural, pulsing emerald light. This wasn't a volcanic vent. It was the entrance to the Vesper Deep Dome. The gate was a wall of shimmering, translucent reptilian gel, stretching 100 yards across the seafloor. It looked like a living lung, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of the ocean's deep currents. The final approach. The director said the squid suits would act as the key, Thorne said, his hand hovering over the seal release toggle. "But looking at that thing, I don't think it's waiting for a key. I think it's waiting for a meal." Double quote. The manta slowed, its nose hovering inches from the shimmering mercury-like surface of the gel. The craft's Tesseract field began to interlock with the gel's bioelectric field, creating a shower of golden sparks in the water. "Suit up," Thorne commanded. "We go out through the liquid lock. Once you're in the gel, do not, I repeat, do not disengage your neural dampeners, no matter how good it feels." The mechanical clicking of the manta's airlock echoed like a death knell. Inside, Miller slammed his fist against the console as the HUDs turned a deep, warning crimson. "The PFC, perfluorocarbon, levels are spiking," Miller shouted. The liquid-breathing medium in the squid suits was only rated for a 5.5-hour immersion window. Beyond that, the synthetic oxygen carrier would begin to bond permanently with the lung tissue, turning their respiratory systems into a crystallized, non-functional lattice. The director's borrowed math didn't account for the gel's thermal resistance, Chen added, her fingers flying across the biometrics. "Thorne isn't just happy, he's being anesthetized. If we don't pull him out in the next 300 minutes, he won't have lungs left to breathe air again." Double quote. The throne room, a biodigital cathedral. Thorne breached the inner layer of the membrane. He didn't fall, he drifted into a space that defied every law of the world above. The throne room was a vast, subterranean geode, the walls lined with a pulsing, black obsidian that seemed to swallow the light. This was the heart of the reptilian dome. Suspended in the center were three massive, translucent pillars, the overlords, their scaled skin glistening with a protective mucus. The vision, Thorne saw the world not through eyes, but through the sentinel nanites. In his suit, the overlords weren't just sitting, they were plugged in. Thick, pulsing cables of the same mercury gel connected the base of their spines directly into the floor of the cavern. The feeding protocol, Thorne realized with a jolt of horror, that the peace he felt was a byproduct of the overlord's neurometabolism. They weren't speaking, they were digesting his experiences, his memories, his very identity. The rescue mission, T-5 hours, 28 minutes and 0 seconds. Back in the Manta, Miller engaged the emergency extraction tether. Chen, suit up. We're going in on a hot link. If the gel tries to phase lock us, I'm overloading the Tesseract core to create an electromagnetic pulse. It might fry the Manta's nav comms, but it'll kickstart Thorn's heart. Double quote. The director's voice crackled through the abyss comms, sounding distant and cold. Miller, if you blow that core, you lose the mass reduction field. The abyss will crush you before you hit the first thermocline. Stay the course. Let the integration finish. Double quote. Go to hell, Director, Miller hissed. He stepped into the airlock, the squid suit's PFC liquid filling his mask with a cold, medicinal burn. The scene technology shift, the glitch reality. As Miller and Chen pushed into the gel, the environment began to glitch. The reptilian dumb recognized the rescue attempt as a foreign body, an infection. The biblical sentinel connection. Thorn, pinned in the hardening glass, looked up at the overlords. Beside the central pillar sat a weathered, metallic object, the marine variant of the sentinel. It was identical to the one on the Martian mesa, but its double mandibles were slowly moving, grinding together in a rhythmic, mechanical hunger. They aren't just hiding here. Thorn's thoughts broadcasted to his team through the suit's bone conduction. They're farming us. The sentinels are the harvesters, and we just delivered ourselves to the granary. The clock on Miller's wrist cuff strobed a violent, dying amber 0 hours, 14 minutes, and 22 seconds remaining. The PFC liquid in Thorn's lungs was no longer a breathing medium. It was becoming a tomb of synthetic crystals. Sarah, get the tether on him. I'm going to blow the core. Miller's voice was a jagged rasp through the liquid-filled mask. He didn't wait for an answer. He reached into the squid suit's auxiliary port and bypassed the safety interlocks of the Tesseract core. By forcing a massive surge of mercury plasma into the MFD's resonant cavity, he created a God pulse. A localized, high-energy electromagnetic collapse. The shattering, the EMP strike. The cavern screamed. The emerald light of the reptilian dome didn't just fade, it shattered like glass. The physical impact, the hardening mercury gel, caught in the frequency of the pulse, underwent a phase transition. It turned from a solid back into a frantic, splashing liquid. The Overlord's reaction. The three pillars of the Overlord spasmed, their neural links to the dome severed. For a microsecond, the no-want frequency was replaced by a screech of pure, digital agony. Thorn, suddenly freed from the hardening wall, slumped into Chen's arms. She didn't hesitate. She slammed the magnetic winch on his belt, and the high-tension cable began to scream as it hauled them back toward the violet light of the Manta's open hatch. The escape, T-0 hours, 2 minutes, and 11 seconds. The Manta was bucking like a dying animal. Without the Tesseract field to stabilize the interior, the 20,000 feet of ocean pressure was beginning to groan against the obsidian hull. Get him in. Seal it, Miller roared, diving through the hatch just as the obsidian door fused shut. The craft shot upward, the MFD burning white-hot as it struggled to regain mass reduction. Behind them, the green glow of the Vesper deep faded into the blackness of the abyss, but the handshake had already been completed. The succumbing, the cost of integration. In the pressurized cabin, Chen frantically ripped Thorn's mask away. He wasn't gasping for air. He was breathing, but the rhythm was wrong. It was too steady, too deep. The gel residue, Thorn's skin wasn't pale, it was shimmering with a faint, iridescent mercury sheen. The reptilian gel hadn't just coated him, it had molecularly bonded with his blood-brain barrier. The final transformation, as the Manta breached the 5,000-foot mark. Thorn opened his eyes. They weren't the eyes of the man who had boarded the craft in the Black Ridge hangar. The pupils were vertical slits, flickering with the same emerald light of the dome. Thorn, Elias, look at me, Chen cried, reaching for a stimulant injector. He caught her wrist with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for a man who had just survived the Hadal Zone. He leaned in, his voice a low, melodic thrum that resonated in her teeth. It's not a rescue, Sarah, he whispered, the gel beginning to leak from his tear ducts. Carrier. It's post-mission log, Black Ridge Echo 7. When the Manta finally settled onto the induction pad at sub-level 9, the director was waiting. He didn't look at Miller or Chen. He walked straight to the medical litter where Thorne lay, silent and shimmering. The PFC limit was 5.5 hours, Miller spat, his suit still dripping with abyss water. Director, the gel ate him. He's gone? The director reached out and touched Thorne's mercury-slicked forehead. Thorne didn't flinch, he leaned into the touch, a silent sentinel now serving a new master. He isn't gone, Miller, the director said, a thin, triumphant smile touching his lips. Calibrated, he is the first of the everlasting to walk on land. He's finally in the speculative engineering layer. This scene acts as the proof of concept for the final act. Thorne isn't a casualty, he is a prototype. The director Sterling has successfully created a biological interface that can bypass the reptilian firewall and commune directly with the Sentinels. The calibrated man. He's finally calibrated, the director repeated, the words tasting of cold iron and victory, the first of the everlasting to walk on land. Here's Miller took a step back, his boots squelching on the sterile grating of the deck. He looked from the shimmering, mercury-coated figure of Thorne to the director, and for the first time, the hardened diver looked terrified. Calibrated to what? Miller demanded, his hand hovering near the dive knife strapped to his thigh. He stopped breathing at 4,000 feet, director. The telemetry flatlined. That thing on the litter, that's just the suit walking the body. The telemetry flatlined because our sensors are designed to read mammalian biology, Sterling said, his voice smooth, dismissing the diver's panic as one might dismiss a child's nightmare. Thorne isn't running on mammalian software anymore, Miller. He's running on Sentinel logic. Sterling leaned over the litter. Thorne's eyes were open, but they weren't looking at the ceiling of sub-level 9. They were fixed on a point far beyond the concrete and the ocean above. The pupils were fully dilated, two black holes absorbing the room's light. "Can you hear them?" Sterling whispered to the prone figure. "Can you hear the watchers on the ridge?" Thorne's lips didn't move, but a sound, a low, resonant thrum vibrated from his chest cavity. It wasn't a vocal cord vibration, it was the hum of a standing wave. Sterling smiled, a genuine, terrifying expression of vindication. "He hears them," Sterling said, straightening his cuffs. "He hears the lunar golems grinding in the regolith of Tycho. He hears the Martian architects waking up in Cydonia." "You're insane," Chen spoke up from the shadows, his voice trembling. "Test the new scrubbers. That was the mission." "We were down there to the mission." Sterling turned on them, his eyes flashing with the cold fire of the Magister. "Never about scrubbers. It was a penetration test." He walked around the litter, pacing like a predator circling a kill. "The reptilians believe they have locked this solar system down," Sterling lectured. "They have their neural cuff around the planet, keeping humanity asleep. They have their patrol ships in orbit, but they are arrogant. They don't look at the perimeter." He pointed a manicured finger at Thorne. "We sent Thorne down to the abyssal node to see if he could handshake with the outer guard, without the reptilians intercepting the signal. And he did." Sterling looked at the shimmering man. Thorne was a living antenna. The gel in his lungs, the perfluorocarbon loaded with heavy gold isotopes, had turned his entire nervous system into a scalar receiver. "Right now," Sterling said softly, "Thorne is broadcasting his location to the Kuiper Belt blockade. Every breath he takes is a ping to the Sentinel spheres at the edge of the system. He is telling them exactly where the cracks in the reptilian defense grid are." Miller stared at his friend on a table. Thorne's skin seemed to ripple, the mercury sheen flowing like liquid armor. "So he's a spy," Miller whispered. "For who?" "For the landlords," Sterling replied. "Eviction notice just got signed." "The reptilians are just the squatters, Miller," and the Sterling placed his hand on Thorne's chest. The vibration was stronger now. It felt like standing next to a transformer substation. "Get him to isolation," Sterling ordered, his tone shifting back to bureaucratic. "Ice him. You cannot sedate a rock. Just keep him hydrated with the golden sol. Do not sedate him if the syndicate asks what happened," Chen asked. "Tell them he has the bends," Sterling said, walking toward the exit. "Tell them he's brain damaged. Let them think he's broken. They act with impunity only as long as they think we are blind." Double quote. He paused at the blast door, looking back at the everlasting man. "They don't know that the Atlas is next," Sterling murmured to himself. Jason Grevis, he is the weapon. Thorn was the probe. The blast door hissed shut, sealing the silence in with the hum of the awakened sentinel. Chapter 31. The Vigil of the Rust. The wind on the Cydonia Menzi does not howl. It whispers. It is too thin to scream, so it hisses through the vents of the broken mesa like a serpent testing the air. The Watcher stood on the ridge, its optical sensors magnified to 400x. It was not a man. It was a litho-sentinel, a construct of living geology. Its outer carapace was indistinguishable from the surrounding basalt, a perfect camouflage evolved over eons of silence. It did not breathe oxygen, it processed the weak solar radiation and the background gamma decay of the planet's core. It looked down into the crater. There, half buried in the iron oxide drifts, lay the Emerald Sentinel. To a human rover, it would look like a trick of the light, a green rock with a face. But the Watcher knew the truth. It was a biocybernetic unit, a brother in arms from the First Era. It lay in 3 pieces. The torso was shattered, the heavy ceremetallic plates rent asunder by a weapon that hadn't existed for 1,000,000 years. But the head was intact. A shimmering, barely visible stasis bubble surrounded the helmet. The faceplate was the color of deep ocean jade, the green mask that defied the red spectrum of the rest of the planet. Inside that bubble, time had stopped. The pilot was not dead, he was paused. He was waiting for a rescue signal that had been jammed since the fall of Atlantis. "Sleep, brother," the Watcher transmitted on a tight beam encrypted channel. "The relief fleet is not yet at the helipause." The Watcher shifted its weight. The hydraulic servos in its legs groaned, a sound like tectonic plates shifting. It turned its gaze from the tragic past to the dangerous present. Beneath its feet, deep in the honeycombed lava tubes of the Tharsis bulge, the enemy was moving. The reptilians. The Watcher could feel their vibrations through the soles of its feet. They were scurrying like rats in the walls of a burning house. They moved back and forth to the blue planet, Earth, using vortals, unstable, ripping tears in the fabric of space-time that bypassed the Sentinel's blockade. They were desperate. They were mining the ancient archives, trying to find the codes to the planetary defense grid before the Nibiru system arrived. They wanted to turn Mars into their fortress again. Unauthorized, the Watcher registered the seismic signature of a reptilian transport sled moving in the deep tunnels. Access denied. The Watcher raised its right arm. It didn't hold a rifle. The arm was the rifle, a scalar projection cannon integrated into the forearm. It aimed not at the horizon, but at the ground. It calculated the depth, the rock density, and the speed of the reptilian sled moving 3 miles below. Pulse. There was no sound, only a sudden, violent displacement of dust around the Watcher's feet. A focused beam of gravity waves punched straight down through the crust. 3 miles down, the tunnel ceiling collapsed. The reptilian sled was crushed instantly, buried under megatons of rock. The vortal destabilized and snapped shut, cutting the lifeline to Earth. The Watcher lowered its arm. "The red planet is closed," it broadcasted to the subterranean dark. "The Guardians are awake." It looked back at the green mask, frozen in its bubble of hope. "Soon," the Watcher promised. "When the Atlas rises, you will rise." It resumed its vigil, a stone statue waiting for the war to end. The event horizon. Sublevel 12, the Faraday chamber. The room was designed to hold a nuclear detonation. The walls were 6 feet of lead-lined concrete, shielded by a Tesla cage meant to dampen any electromagnetic pulse. In the center of the room, strapped to a vertical surgical table made of non-conductive polycarbonate, was the Traveler. He looked human, but only in the way a stealth bomber looks like a bird. His skin was pale, almost translucent, revealing a network of veins that didn't pump red blood. They pulsed with a slow, rhythmic gold luminescence. His eyes were closed. He wasn't asleep. He was waiting. Vane stood behind the observation glass, safe, he hoped, inside a secondary shielded booth. Beside him, Dr. Harris, the syndicate's lead geneticist, was sweating through his sterile suit. "We can't get a sample, sir," Harris stammered, his hands shaking as he adjusted the remote manipulators. "Every time the needle gets within 3 millimeters of the dermis, the equipment, it just stops." "It doesn't stop, Harris," Vane said, his voice cold. "He stops it. He's manipulating the electron flow in the copper wiring. He's turning the machines off with his mind." "Then we use a human," Vane ordered electronics. "Send in the phlebotomist. Manual extraction." "No," Harris paled days. "Sir, the last team, they're still in the psych ward. They haven't spoken in 3. Send them in," Vane said. "Or you go in." Inside the chamber, the airlock hissed. 2 soldiers in full tactical gear pushed a terrified technician toward the table. The technician held a syringe like it was a live grenade. The traveler didn't move. He didn't even breathe. But as the technician stepped into the aura zone, the 10-foot radius around the subject, the air in the room instantly dropped 20 degrees. Frost began to form on the inside of the observation glass. The technician raised the needle. The pilot opened his eyes. They weren't eyes. They were vortices, deep, indigo swirls that seemed to rotate in opposite directions. Thrum. A sound that wasn't a sound, a psychotronic shockwave, hit the room. The overhead lights didn't just flicker, they screamed. The filaments inside the bulbs vibrated at such a high frequency that they shattered, raining glass down on the soldiers. Then came the fear. It wasn't normal fear. It was primal terror, the kind of fear a gazelle feels when the lion's jaws are already closing. It was a broadcast signal directly into the amygdala. One of the soldiers dropped his rifle. A dark stain spread instantly across the front of his tactical pants. He fell to his knees, weeping, his bladder letting go as his nervous system lost all autonomic control. The other soldier began to vomit, his body purging itself in a desperate attempt to reject the poison of the pilot's presence. The technician with the needle didn't wet himself. He simply disconnected. His eyes rolled back into his head. He stiffened, arms locking rigid at his sides, and he toppled backward like a felled tree, fainted, vagal shutdown. His brain had pulled the circuit breaker rather than process the consciousness staring at him. Inside the booth, the monitors exploded. Sparks showered down on Vane and Harris. The power grid. Harris screamed over the alarms grounding the entire facility. "He's pulling the current from the walls." Vane watched the chaos. He didn't panic. He watched with a mixture of hatred and awe. Inside the dark, freezing chamber, amidst the sobbing soldiers and the unconscious scientist, the traveler remained perfectly still. The needle lay on the floor, untouched. The pilot looked up at the observation glass. He looked directly at Vane. "You cannot bleed a star, little man," the voice echoed inside Vane's skull, bypassing his ears entirely. "You can only burn." The emergency lights kicked on, dim, red, and flickering. The pilot closed his eyes again, and the terror instantly lifted, leaving only the smell of ozone and urine. "Get them out," Vane whispered, wiping a trickle of blood from his own nose. "Pump in the gas. Seal the room." "Sir," Harris gasped, clutching his chest. We can't extract the DNA. It's impossible. His immune system isn't biological. It's reality-based." "I know," Vane said, turning away from the glass. "That's why we don't need his blood anymore. We need a proxy. We need someone who is already contaminated." Vane looked at the file on his tablet, the only screen that hadn't shattered. It was a picture of Jason, the half-human half-sovereign DNA. "Prepare the atlas," Vane ordered. "If we can't bleed the pilot, we'll bleed the replacement." Double quote. Chapter 32. The Panic Protocol. The 13th of January, 2018, 8:05 a.m. HST. U.S. Pacific Command, Packham, Joint Operations Center. Oahu, Hawaii. The coffee in Captain Lyle's mug was lukewarm. The screens in front of him were a wall of comforting green status lights. It was a Saturday morning shift, The skeleton crew shift. Nothing happened on Saturday mornings except maintenance drills and inevitable hungover briefings. Then, the red phone didn't ring. It purred. It wasn't the standard secure line. It was the black line, the one connected directly to the shadow cabinet servers in D.C. The line that bypassed the Joint Chiefs and went straight to the architects. Lyles picked it up. His hand was trembling. He had never heard this line active in 12 years of service. Identification, a voice synthesized to sound like grinding metal demanded. Lyles, Captain. ID, Sierra Tango 7. Execute protocol, siren song, the voice commanded. Authorization, Vane override Alpha. Target zone, Archipelago 808. Lyles blinked at his screen. A new window popped up, overriding the standard drill software. It wasn't a simulation menu. It was a live broadcast interface. Sir. Lyles stammered drill parameter. Siren song is it's a theoretical psychological stress test. It's not the order is real world, the voice cut him off. Launch the alert. You have 10 seconds. Lyles looked at the drop-down menu. 1. Packham, CDW, state only. 2. Drill, internal. 3. Ballistic missile threat, inbound. His cursor hovered over option 3. Why? Lyles whispered. There are no missiles on the radar. The sky is clear. We are not testing the radar, Captain, the voice replied, cold and amused. Livestock. Push the button. We are testing the Lyles swallowed. The chain of command was absolute. If Vane, whoever that was, had the codes, Lyles was just the finger. He clicked. Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. Somewhere in the deep state cloud Vane sat in a darkened room. But he wasn't looking at a map of Hawaii. He was looking at a biotelemetry spectrogram. It showed the collective heart rate and galvanic skin response of 1.4 million people in Hawaii. At 8:07 a.m., the alert hit the cell towers. The graph spiked, a vertical wall of red. Panic, terror, adrenaline. The loosh energy, the fear frequency, flooded the sensors. Mothers were shoving children into bathtubs. Tourists were crying in hotel lobbies. Men were reaching for bottles of whiskey, for pills, for anything to numb the incoming fire. Vane zoomed in on the data, filtering out the noise. He was looking for the anomaly. Come on, Vane whispered, his eyes scanning the chaotic waveforms. Show yourself. Everyone else is screaming. Everyone else is dropping their frequency to the basement. Where are you? He was hunting for the one signal that didn't spike. He was looking for the eye of the hurricane. If Jason Grevis was the chosen one, he wouldn't panic. He wouldn't reach for the drink. He would go still. Vane watched the alcohol consumption metrics, real-time credit card transactions at liquor stores, smart fridge data, biological stress markers. He wanted Jason to break. He wanted the clean node to contaminate itself with fear and ethanol, revealing his location like a flare in the night. Drink, you son of a bitch, Vane hissed. Be human. Be weak. But on the screen, amidst the ocean of red panic, there was a single, tiny dot of blue, a stable and wavering line. Someone in Maui wasn't afraid. Someone was just watching. Vane smashed his fist onto the console. He's not drinking, Vane growled. He's not buying it. He reached for the comms to Lyles. Cancel it, Vane ordered. Call it a mistake. Tell them it was the wrong button. We missed him. Double quote. Packham 8:45 a.m. Lyles stared at the screen. The false alarm retraction was sent. He slumped in his chair, sweat soaking his uniform. He had just terrified an entire state, potentially caused heart attacks, car accidents, trauma that would last a generation. And for what? He looked at the log file. The command hadn't come from the president. It hadn't come from the Pentagon. It had come from a server address that didn't exist. Protocol, siren song, status, failed. Target, unacquired. Lyles deleted the log. He knew, with the certainty of a man who had seen too much, that if he ever spoke of Vane, the next missile alert wouldn't be false. Chapter 33. The world inside the hull. Location: Tier for the arboreal deck. Inside the Atlas. Mercury stood up. It felt like the first time he had ever stood, not because his legs were weak, they were stronger than they had ever been, but because the gravity felt curated. It didn't pull him down, it held him to the ground like a lover's hand. He looked up. In front of him was a tree, but to call it a tree was like calling the Pacific Ocean a puddle. The trunk was a vertical wall of bark the color of polished mahogany, easily 3 city blocks wide. It stretched upward, piercing a canopy of bioluminescent leaves that functioned as the sky of this tier, filtering the artificial sunlight into a warm, dappled gold. Target assessment, Mercury whispered, his old instincts kicking in. His mind flashed back to the NRO National Reconnaissance Office. He remembered the noise of the chopper, the smell of JP-4 fuel, the weight of the rescue harness. He had been a jolly green rescue jumper, PJ, specializing in signals and electronics. He pulled pilots out of burning jungles and sinking cockpits. He was used to chaos. He was used to the screaming metal of war. But here, the silence was absolute. The air tasted of ozone and honey. It was sweeter than anything he had ever breathed. He loved the taste of paradise at whatever time of day this was. I must have drowned, Mercury thought, looking at his hands. They shimmered with a faint, silvery iridescence. The fluid of his spacesuit's life support, it didn't work. Or I died on the induction pad. He took a step. The moss beneath his bare feet felt like velvet. He walked around the curvature of the massive trunk. In the distance, stretching across a chasm of misty air, was a route. It was a suspension bridge of living wood, wide as an 8-lane highway, connecting his island to the distant green cliffs miles away. Paradise, he murmured. It has to be. Double quote. He remembered his swimming fitness, the endless laps in the NRO pools, training his lungs to hold air for 4 minutes. That fitness had been the reason Vane selected him for the dive. But now, he didn't feel the need to breathe. The air just diffused into him. He walked toward the edge of the route highway. He was looking for water. If this was heaven, there had to be a beach. Then, the memory hit him. It wasn't a flashback of the war. It was a vision the ship had given him during the transition. He saw his mother and father. They were sitting on a porch, laughing. They looked healthy. The cancer that had withered them in the hospital ward, the tubes, the morphine drips, the slow fading of their light was gone. They are here, the thought bloomed in his mind. It wasn't his voice. It was the Atlas entity. The pattern is preserved, the voice assured him. Nothing is lost in the archive. You will see them again. The biological interface is prepared. Tears welled in Mercury's silver eyes. He wasn't crying from sadness, he was crying from relief. The crushing weight of grief he had carried for a decade simply evaporated. Take me to them, Mercury said to the empty air. Cross the bridge, the ship replied. The residential sector is across the route. Mercury stepped onto the massive route. It didn't shake. It was solid as bedrock. He began to run. Not the heavy, plodding run of a soldier in combat gear, but the effortless, gliding sprint of a soul that has set down its burden. He ran toward the distant green, toward the promise of a reunion, unaware that he wasn't in the afterlife. He was in the lifeboat, and he was the first passenger aboard to feel so alive. The Lodge of the Open Sky. Late 2020. The parking lot behind St. Teresa's Church, Kauai, Maui. The sunset over Kauai was a bruised purple, bleeding into the charcoal of the ocean. The air smelled of exhaust, frying onions from the nearby kitchens, and the sweet, skunky heavy perfume of high-grade cannabis. Jason sat against the driver's door of his Nissan Sentra. He took a long, slow drag from a joint, holding the smoke in his lungs like he was inspecting its molecular structure, then exhaled a perfect stream into the cooling air. He passed it to Augie. Augie, leaning against the rusty fender of his Ford Ranger, took it with a nod. He didn't smoke like a stoner, he smoked like a soldier on leave. Efficient, medicinal. It wasn't always like this, Jason said. watching the smoke drift toward the Catholic church where the line for the soup kitchen was forming. I was a data network engineer in the UK. I built communication systems. I structured software test systems for global internet infrastructure. Oggy held the smoke, listening. He watched Jason's hands. They were rough now, scarred from kitchen burns and surfboard wax, but they moved with the precision of a draftsman. Then what? Oggy exhaled. Then I needed to breathe, Jason said. Left the corporate bubble, became a scuba instructor. Taught people how to survive in a hostile medium. Then I moved to Pennsylvania. Jason's eyes darkened. He looked at the asphalt. That's where the algorithm broke, Jason whispered. Number 45 took office. The frequency of the country changed. My life, it just dissolved. Second wife gone. My 2 sons, separated. Permanent estrangement. I lost the house, the dog, the narrative. He took the joint back. Ended up here. Jason gestured to the island. Pizza chef at Pizza Madness, standing in front of a 500-degree oven, watching the dough rise, thinking about how heat transforms matter. Now, I drive for 808 pickups. I deliver sushi to tourists in condos I can't afford to rent. Oggy looked at him. Most guys on the street had a sob story. They blamed the ex-wife, the booze, the government. But Jason wasn't complaining. He was reporting. He was describing the collapse of his life like an engineer describing a controlled demolition. You aren't broken, brother, Oggy grunted. You're just stripped. Maybe, Jason mused. I've been reading about the Masons, the Blue Lodge. They talk about the rough ashlar, the stone that has to be hammered and chiseled before it can fit into the temple. Oggy froze. He looked at Jason, the homeless delivery driver, the pizza chef. He's seeking the light, Oggy thought. He's down here in the mud, eating charity food, and he's thinking about sacred geometry. Oggy knew then. This was the assignment. The daily bread. For the next 2 months, the ritual was the same. Every evening, they met at the Catholic Church. They stood in line with the Methodists, the mentally ill, and the forgotten veterans. They took their styrofoam containers of pasta and salad. They ate on the hoods of their cars. They didn't talk about the food. They talked about the stars. They talked about the weird lights over the channel. One night, after the plates were cleared, the conversation shifted. You ever wonder why they watch us? Oggy asked, pointing his plastic fork at the sky. Who? Jason asked. The Watchers, Oggy said. His voice dropped an octave. I was Navy, Master at Arms. I saw things on the radar, Jason. Things that moved at Mach 20 and stopped on a dime. They aren't Russian. They aren't Chinese. Jason leaned in. The intense blue eyes locked onto Oggy. Go on. I think they're farming us, Oggy whispered. There are entities. Reptilians. They feed on the friction. They feed on the fear. That's why the world is a mess. It's a harvest. Most people would have laughed. Most people would have inched away. Jason didn't. He nodded slowly. The Archons, Jason said. The keepers of the Matrix. I felt the neural cuff. I feel the pressure in my head when I get too close to the truth. Oggy smiled. A wide, toothy grin that transformed his grizzled face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He didn't show Jason the badge. He showed him a card. It was a dues card. Scottish Rite. Southern jurisdiction. I'm a 32nd degree, Oggy said quietly. Jason, I've seen the plays. Master of the Royal Secret. I've walked the steps. Jason looked at the card, then at the homeless veteran eating church pasta. A master mason, Jason whispered. Guarding the parking lot. The temple is where you stand, Oggy replied, putting the card away. Temple is under attack. That's why we found each other. And right now, the Oggy lit the roach of the joint and passed it to Jason. You want to join the craft? Oggy asked. Be careful. There are 2 kinds of masons. The ones who want to wear the funny hat, and the ones who want to build the exit door. Jason took the joint. I want to build the door, Oggy. Good, Oggy said. Because I think you're the only one who has the key. Double quote. The Black Ball Protocol. Masonic Lodge No. 472 Kahilu, Maui. Stated meeting the business of the craft. The air in the lodge was stale, recycled through AC vents that hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. On the secretary's desk lay a check for $80. Subject, petition for degrees. Applicant, Jason Grevas. The room was murmuring. The investigation committee had reported. 3 sponsors had signed. Technically, the man was qualified. Then Brother Swain stood up. Swain was a visitor from Los Angeles, a man with a tan that cost money and a suit that cost more. He was vacationing on Maui with his son, but he never missed a meeting. Worshipful Master, Swain boomed, his voice filling the room. Petitioner, I met him in the parking lot before the meeting. I have to speak on this. Paul, sitting in the east as the presiding officer, covering for the actual master who was out sick, narrowed his eyes. He tapped the gavel. Go ahead, Brother Swain. Double quote. I shook his hand, Swain said, looking around at the brothers, the retired cops, the teachers, the mechanics. I've shaken hands with senators. I've shaken hands with heavyweight boxers. But this guy. Swain held up his own hand, staring at it as if it still vibrated. It was like gripping a tree trunk, Swain whispered. I turned to my boy afterward and said, energy. Not aggressive, just rooted, solid earth. Son, that wasn't a handshake. That was a transfer of. A few of the older brothers nodded. They liked strong men. They liked the old school vibe. He looks like a Viking, Swain laughed, trying to lighten the mood but failing to hide his awe. I'm telling you, the man is Thor. If we are building a temple, that's the kind of pillar you want holding up the roof. The room buzzed with approval. The Viking narrative was taking hold. The brothers were imagining a new, strong energy entering their dying lodge. Paul felt the danger. He sat in the high chair under the letter G. His CIA instincts were screaming. They are falling for it, Paul thought. They feel the charisma. They feel the vril. If I let him in, he will turn this social club into a mystery school within 6 months. He will wake them up. Paul couldn't let that happen. His orders from the Grove, the Owls, were clear: deny access. But he couldn't say. He's a wizard. He couldn't say. He's the pilot of the Atlas. Double quote. He had to use the weapon of the bureaucrat, snobbery. Paul cleared his throat. It was a dry, authoritative sound. Brethren, Paul said, his voice dropping to the smooth, reasonable tone of a handler. Swain's enthusiasm is noted, and we all appreciate a firm handshake. Brother Paul picked up the petition. He held it like it was a dirty tissue. But we must look at the whole stone, not just the polish. This man, Mr. Grevas, lists his residence as none. He is transient. He is living out of a vehicle. The murmuring stopped. The older, conservative brothers shifted in their seats. Homelessness was a red flag. It meant instability. It meant asking for loans. Furthermore, Paul continued, twisting the knife. During the interview, he admitted to the frequent use of cannabis. He does not drink alcohol, which is his right, but he surrounds himself with the haze of the counterculture. Paul looked at the faces in the room. He saw the doubt creeping in. He saw the judgment. We are a fraternity of standing, Paul said, soothing his own conscience with every line. Need men who can pay their dues, men who fit the mold. Do we really want to bring in a Viking who smells of weed and sleeps on the beach? Is that the image of this lodge? He leaned forward, locking eyes with the senior deacon. He is chaotic, brethren, and masonry is about order. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. He took Jason's greatest strengths, his freedom, his natural medicine, his power, and painted them as liabilities. Swain looked deflated. He sat down, rubbing his hand. He wanted to argue, but the logic of the 33rd degree was heavy. Paul sat back. He checked his watch. Crisis averted, he thought. I'll force a delay. I'll make them reject him on a technicality. The owl watches the night, and I have kept the mouse out of the house. We will table the vote, Paul commanded, banging the gavel. The applicant's financial stability, pending further investigation into the sound of the gavel echoed like a coffin lid closing, but outside, in the parking lot, the vibration remained. Paul had delayed the entry, but he hadn't stopped the signal. The City of St. Francis in the Black Cube. December, 2019. The Bohemian Club City Clubhouse. 624 Taylor Street, San Francisco. The fog outside was thick, muffling the cable car bells on the steep streets. Inside the heavy oak doors of the City Club, the air was warm, smelling of old money, leather, and the specific brand of cigar smoke that costs $500 a stick. Paul, the 33rd degree and traitorous worshipful master of Maui, sat in a high-backed wing chair near the fireplace. He swirled a glass of single malt scotch, watching the flames. Across from him sat the Council of Owls. These weren't the politicians who attended the summer encampment at the grove to pee on trees. These were the architects, the men who wrote the scripts the politicians read. The Maui node is compromised, Paul reported, his voice low. The Viking, Jason Grevis, has breached the perimeter, he petitioned. The brothers were ready to vote him in. Brother Swain from LA was practically campaigning for him. "And you stopped it?" asked a man in the shadows, his face obscured by the wing of his chair. "I used the black cube," Paul said, taking a sip. "I invoked the unsuitability clause. Homelessness, cannabis. I shamed them into a delay, but it's temporary. The charisma of the subject is viral. They want him in. They feel the energy." The man in the shadows leaned forward. It was Vane. "If he enters the lodge, he accesses the egregore," Vane said. "He will use the Masonic network to amplify his signal. We cannot allow him to have a platform. We cannot allow him to gather." "I can't blackball him forever," Paul admitted. "Eventually, the brothers will override me." Vane smiled. It was a terrifying, thin expression. "Then we don't stop the candidate," Vane whispered. "We stop the meeting." Vane placed a file on the table. It was stamped with the logo of a biolab in Wuhan. "We initiate protocol, Crown," Vane said. "A global pathogen, high transmission, low lethality, maximum panic. We enforce social distancing. We close the lodges. We ban gatherings of more than 10 people." Paul blinked. "Lodge in Kahilu. You're going to shut down the world economy. To keep a pizza chef out of we are shutting down the world to isolate the key," Vane corrected. "If he is homeless, the lockdowns will break him. If he is social, the isolation will starve him. And if the lodges are closed by government mandate, he can never be initiated." Vane threw the file into the fire. "Go back to Maui, Paul. Wait for the order. When the news hits, lock the doors of the temple and don't open them until we say so." Double quote. The digital ether encrypted signal. January 2020. Interface, swordblogspot.com, hidden directory. The blog looked like a relic from 2005. Black background, neon green courier font, filled with dense paragraphs about alchemy and cybernetics. To the casual reader, it was the rambling of a conspiracy theorist. But to Jason Grevis, sitting in his truck behind Pizza Madness, it was a dead drop. Michael wasn't just his old blogging buddy from Ross University days. That was the cover story. Michael was FSHOD, Future Sentient Human Operations Directorate. A clandestine faction of hackers and psychics working within Solar Warden, the deep space fleet that patrolled the solar system. A secure chat window popped up on Jason's phone. "Jason, they blocked me, Michael. I went to the vote. One guy must have shut it down." Michael, "Blocked how? Did they just say no?" Jason, "No. They used a specific term. They said I was black cubed." Double quote. Thousands of miles away, inside a subterranean server farm beneath the Denver airport, Michael's fingers flew across a haptic keyboard. He wasn't wearing a tinfoil hat. He was wearing the flight suit of a Solar Warden intelligence officer. Michael, "Black cube. Confirmed." Jason, "Listen to me. That is specific. In the Hawaii jurisdictions, the black cube is the earth element. It means they are trying to bury you. It's not just a rejection, it's a sealing ritual. They are using Saturnian geometry to lock your frequency. Jason, well, the lock is currently parked in a Nissan Sentra. Michael, don't joke. This proves you are the asset we've been tracking since Ross. Why do you think F-Shod reached out to you back then? Why do you think I emailed you the questions about the Templars? Jason, I thought you were just into history. Michael, I'm into survival. I'm a Templar of the Solar Rite, Jason. I monitor the traffic between Earth and the Moon. And right now, the traffic is redlining. Michael pulled up a threat assessment map on his secondary monitor. It showed a viral bloom in China. Michael, do you realize what just happened? You are the literal fulfillment of the prophecy. Psalm 118:22. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. They rejected you because you don't fit the wall. You are the keystone. Jason, so what happens now? Michael, now the system panics. They just rejected the cure, so now they release the sickness. Have you seen the news from Wuhan? Jason, some flu virus. Michael, it's an atmospheric jammer. They are going to lock the planet down to keep you from moving. They are terrified that if you keep walking free, you'll wake up the sleeper nodes. Jason, so I hide. Michael, no, you hold the line. The great architect of the universe is watching you. Solar Warden has a cruiser, the Midnight Sun, parked in high orbit over the Pacific. We are jamming their jamming, but on the ground, you are on your own. Michael, end transmission. Watch the horizon. The chat window vanished. Jason looked up at the night sky. He didn't just see stars anymore. Solar Warden, Jason whispered, testing the weight of the words. So the cavalry is real. He started the car. The Gimbal Protocol. September, 2019. The Pentagon airing, Sub-Basement 4. Office of the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Information Warfare. The room was soundproof, bug-swept, and shielded by a Faraday cage. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and high treason. 3 men sat around a mahogany table. Vice Admiral Blackjack Thorne, no relation to the pilot, Old Navy, salt-crusted, practical. General Vance, Air Force, representing the syndicate/Vane's interests. The civilian, a man in a grey suit, unnamed, representing the Solar Warden Oversight Committee. On the wall screen, the gimbal video played on a loop. The monochromatic IR footage showed the craft, a classic saucer rotating on its axis against the wind. Look at that thing, the pilot's voice crackled. It's rotating? We can't validate this. General Vance slammed his hand on the table. If we confirm this footage is authentic, we are admitting that we don't control our own airspace. It makes the Air Force look impotent. It makes the trillions we spent on the F-35 look like a joke. The footage is already out, General, the civilian said calmly, has seen it. The question isn't validation, it's classification. It leaked in 2017. The public Admiral Thorne leaned forward. He chewed on an unlit cigar. My pilots are seeing these things every day off the coast of Virginia, Thorne growled. Cubes inside spheres. Tic-tacs. They move from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second. We can't court-martial every pilot who files a report. The morale is cracking. They know we're lying to them. So we lie better, Vance shouted. We call it a drone swarm. We call it Chinese hypersonics. We do not admit that we are being zoo-kept by off-world entities. The civilian stood up. He walked to the screen and paused the video on the rotating craft. We aren't going to call them aliens, the civilian said. Chinese. And we aren't going to call them, he turned to the admirals. We are going to call them UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. We are going to strip the stigma away. We are going to admit they exist, but we are going to claim ignorance of their origin. Why? Vance demanded. Timeline. Vane wants total silence. This soft disclosure endangers the 2025 because the timeline has accelerated, the civilian countered. There are too many cameras, too many civilians with high-def phones. We have anomalies like Jason Grevis in Maui watching black triangles fly over their houses. We have pilots talking on podcasts. The civilian leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. If we don't control the disclosure will control us. We need to release the pressure valve. We admit the objects are real. We establish a task force. We make it boring. We make it bureaucratic. Double quote. And the motive? Thorne asked, eyeing the civilian suspiciously to distract them. Is this to warn the public? Or it's an inoculation, the civilian said. We are giving the public a weak dose of the virus, so they don't die from the shock when the real mothership shows up. He didn't mention the Atlas. He didn't mention that the gimbal craft wasn't alien at all. That it was a Solar Warden scout ship testing the Navy's sensors. Who authorized this? Vance asked, narrowing his eyes. Vane didn't sign off on this. No, the civilian smiled. This order came from the director. Sterling. Thorne looked at the video one last time. He saw the rotation, the impossible physics. Fine, Thorne sighed. Release the statement. The U.S. Navy confirms that the videos circulating in the public domain are indeed unidentified. God help us when they find out what the identified ones look like. The civilian nodded. The truth is a slow drip, Admiral. Today, we let them see the saucer. Tomorrow, we let them see the pilot. Double quote. Chapter 34. The Ionization Wake. The 1st of July, 2021 2 a.m. HST. Air Force Maui Optical and Supercomputing AMOS Site. Summit of Haleakala, Maui elevation, 10,023 feet. The air at the summit was thin, cold, and absolutely still. Below the cloud deck, the island of Maui slept. Above it, the Milky Way was a river of diamond dust, so bright it cast shadows on the white domes of the observatory. Inside Control Room Delta, the coffee was hot and the screens were dark. Lieutenant Vance, no relation to the general, just a nephew in the family business, and Senior Tech Miller sat in the glow of the monitors. They weren't watching for asteroids. They were watching for the bus. Telemetry link is green, Miller said, his fingers dancing over a keyboard that controlled the Advanced Electro-Optical System, AEOS, telescope, a 3.6-meter mirror capable of tracking a basketball in geosynchronous orbit. The atmospheric distortion is minimal. Seeing conditions are 0.05 arcseconds. Good, Vance said, checking his watch. Arrival, T-2 minutes. The dark star is on final approach. Estimated time of. He looked at the main screen. It showed a live feed from the infrared tracking camera. Currently, it was just black space. Then, the sensors screamed. Spike. Ionization bloom detected, Miller announced, his voice steady feet. Speed, Mach 12, dropping to hover. Bearing 330, altitude, 80,000 on the screen, a ghost appeared. It wasn't a saucer, it was a massive isosceles triangle. The leading edge was sharp enough to cut glass, the rear edge spanned a terrifying width. The equivalent of 10 Boeing 747s wing to wing. It blotted out the stars of Cassiopeia. Look at the edges, Vance whispered, zooming the optical camera. Along the perimeter of the craft, the air was glowing with a faint, violet aura, the plasma sheath. Anti-gravity drive is active, Miller narrated for the log. The hull is ionizing the nitrogen in the atmosphere to reduce drag to zero. That's why there's no sonic boom. It's slipping through the air molecules like a hot knife through butter. The massive craft descended. It didn't fly like a plane, it moved like a cursor on the screen. Instant stop. Instant acceleration. Camera 4, tracking, Miller commanded. The massive telescope on the roof swiveled silently, locking onto the behemoth. The shutter clicked rapidly, CHK 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 CHK. Capturing higher resolution images of the hull plating. Resolution is incredible, Vance noted, looking at the raw feed intake valves. I can see the heat dissipation tiles. I can see the rivets on they're testing the new cloaking algorithm, Miller said. The Vanta black coating is supposed to absorb 99.9% of visual light, but the IR camera is still picking up the heat signature from the gravity amplifiers. That's why we're here. Vance nodded. To tell them where the leaks are. The craft hovered directly over the observatory. It was so large that for a moment, the entire summit was plunged into total darkness, the starlight completely blocked by the artificial ceiling. A beam of amber light pulsed from the center of the triangle. It hit the radar dome. Handshake confirmed, Miller said. IFF. Identification friend or foe. Signal received. It's the USSS Hilankota, one of the Solar Warden heavy lifters. She's beautiful, Vance murmured. And terrifying. The amber light retracted. The violet glow on the edges brightened to a blinding white. Flash. The craft didn't fly away. It simply translated. It accelerated from 0 to Mach 25 in less than a second, shooting straight up into the exosphere. The sonic boom never came. The air rushed back into the vacuum, creating a brief, swirling cloud of ice crystals, a man-made cloud that would confuse the weather radars in Honolulu. Target lost, Miller said, leaning back. Orbit achieved. Vance picked up the secure phone. Control, he said. This is Amos. The Hilankota has cleared the atmosphere. Visual confirmation of plasma leakage on the port stabilizer. Tell the boys at Area 51 they need to tighten the magnetic seals. Copy that, Amos, the voice on the other end crackled. Good eyes. Go dark. Vance hung up. He looked at Miller. You know, Vance said, pouring another coffee, saw that flash. Down there in Lahaina, someone probably just Miller laughed. They'll call it a meteor, or a drone, or swamp gas. Let them, Vance smiled. As long as they don't call it ours. Double quote. The Tesseract link. The 1st of July, 2021. SpaceX restricted facility site X. Kwajalein Atoll, Marshall Islands. The media thought El Skunk was in Texas, tweeting about crypto and building stainless steel silos in a swamp. In reality, he was 4,000 miles away, standing in the center of the Fishbowl Lake Command Center, buried 50 feet beneath the coral sand of Kwajalein. The room was a circle of black glass and holographic projections. There were no press cameras here, no fanboys, just 36 engineers in gray jumpsuits, monitoring the true fleet. Link status, Skunke asked, not looking up from his tablet. Starlink mesh is active, a flight director reported. Satellites 14, 15, and 22 are creating a localized encryption tunnel. We have a secure handshake with the platform. On the main God's Eye screen, the telemetry of the massive black triangle, now hovering in the upper stratosphere south of Hawaii, was visualized. It wasn't just a ship. It was a mobile base. Inside the Vanta-black hull, the physics were aggressive. The engineers had utilized Tesseract geometry, folding the interior space to be larger than the exterior dimensions. Crew habitation is nominal, the comms officer said. Commander Vance reports they are on day 400 of the deployment. No psychological degradation. The hydroponics bay is producing full yields. Skunke smiled. This was the secret. The Dark Star platforms weren't just transport ships, they were arcs. They could stay aloft indefinitely. They generated their own gravity, recycled their own water, and grew their own food. A crew could live, work, and die on the platform without ever touching the ground. Let me speak to them, Skunke ordered. The channel opened. It wasn't radio. It was laser optical data, bounced off the Starlink constellation at light speed. This is Control, Skunke said. Status, Dark Star. The voice that came back was crystal clear, sounding like it was in the room next door, not floating at 80,000 feet. Control, this is Dark Star Actual. The ionization drive is cooling. We are holding station over the Pacific Data Void. The Tesseract containment field is stable at 98%. We have expanded the interior cargo hold. We're ready to receive the heavy equipment. Double quote. Good, Skunke said. The media is distracted. They're looking at the rockets in Boca Chica. They don't see the leviathans in the clouds. He swiped the screen, bringing up the Starlink global map. To the public, the dots were just internet nodes. To Skunke, They were the bars of a cage or a shield. Keep the mesh tight, Skunk commanded terrestrial internet. The fleet talks only to itself. I don't want a single packet of data leaking to the. He looked at the massive triangle on the screen, pulsing with the power of a captured star. We are not just going to Mars, Skunk whispered to the empty room here. The platforms are ready. The habitation is ready. We are bringing Mars. He turned to his second-in-command. Prepare the boring company assets, Skunk said. If the Dark Star can carry the weight, we need to start digging the tunnels on the mainland. The sky is secure. Now we secure the ground. Double quote. The Bluebird and the Black Triangle. July, 2021. SpaceX Command Jet, Gulfstream G650ER. Cruising altitude, 45,000 feet over the Pacific. Skunk was in a good mood. The telemetry from the Dark Star test was flawless. The ion drives had held stable. The cloaking tech had baffled the radars at Pearl Harbor. The media was busy talking about his latest meme coin tweet. Clean run, Skunk said, sipping a diet caffeine-free soda in Texas. They have no idea what we're flying over Hawaii. The public is looking at the rockets. The handler, his chief of security and information warfare, cleared his throat. He held out a tablet. Sir, we have a leak. Skunk waved a dismissive hand. A leak. Some grainy video of a light in the sky. The debunkers will handle it. Swamp gas. Drone. Starlink flare. It's not a video, sir, the handler said, his face grim. It's a schematic. He placed the tablet on the table. Tweet from @JasonGrevis808. Sighting report, Lahaina, Maui, 5:45 HST. Massive Delta-class platform. Silent. Low-altitude cruise toward Haleakala. No photos. Ontological dampening field prevented capture. Sketch attached. This is not ET. This is U.S. Navy Solar Warden heavy lift capability. Double quote. Attached was the image. It wasn't a child's drawing. It was an engineering draft. Skunk stared at it. The silence in the jet was deafening. He drew the vent ports, Skunk whispered. He drew the hexagonal heat tiles. He even got the aspect ratio of the plasma nodes correct. That's a classified propulsion system. Skunk zoomed in on the notes in the margins of the sketch. No sonic boom equals ionization sheath. Apostrophe. Who is this user? Skunk demanded. An engineer. A defector. Jason Grevis, the handler replied. Driver. Currently living in his truck in Maui. No clearance. No academic tenure. He's a delivery. A driver. Skunk laughed, but there was no humor in it. Reverse engineered our flagship platform with a pencil. A homeless man just. He calls it ontological shock, sir, the handler explained. He claims the ship's psionic field stopped him from taking a photo, but his brain was able to record the geometry. He bypassed the neural dampener. Skunk stood up and paced the cabin. This was the nightmare scenario. The dampener works on the impulse, Skunk muttered, analyzing the failure. It stops the average person from caring. It makes them forget. But this guy, this Jason, his mind is structured differently. He didn't panic. He analyzed. The dampener doesn't work on engineers. It just makes them curious. He looked back at the tweet. It had 50 likes, then 100, then 500. UFO Twitter was lighting up. People were corroborating the design. Other witnesses were saying, yes, that's exactly what I saw in Arizona. The algorithm is amplifying him, Skunk realized. Jack Dorsey's platform, it's too open. It's designed to spread viral content regardless of classification level. If this sketch goes mainstream, they'll start looking for the base. Skunk looked out the window at the clouds. I can't shut down the internet, Skunk said. Draws too much attention. And I can't kill a civilian for drawing a picture. That. He turned to the handler. How much is Twitter worth? The handler blinked. Sir, you mean the company? Yes, Skunk said, his eyes narrowing. If I own the platform, I own the algorithm. I can. Should add in the keywords. I can throttle the reach of accounts like @JasonGrevis808. I can make sure that when someone searches for black triangle, they get pictures of geometry homework, not my fleet. It would cost billions, sir, tens of billions. Do it, Skunke ordered. Start the acquisition. Call it a crusade for free speech. The public loves a savior. They'll never suspect I'm buying the town square just to silence the town crier. He looked at the sketch of his ship one last time. You got lucky, Jason, Skunke whispered to the digital avatar of the blonde man. Your pencil beat my cloaking device, but let's see how loud you can shout when I own the megaphone. Double quote. Chapter 35. The Breath of the Dragon. The 8th of August, 2023. Lahaina Fire Station, 2:30 p.m. Chief Ventura wiped the soot from his forehead. He looked at the report on his clipboard. Status: contained. The brush fire off Lahaina Luna Road, sparked that morning by a downed HECO line, was dead. His boys had soaked it. They had walked the perimeter. There was no smoke, no heat. Just wet ash and the relentless, screaming wind of Hurricane Dora passing 500 miles to the south. We got lucky, he muttered to his captain Rode. With these winds, if that thing had jumped it's quiet, Chief, the captain said, looking at the swaying palms. Too quiet. Ventura looked up. The sky wasn't blue. It was a bruised, sickly yellow. The air pressure was dropping so fast his ears popped. It didn't feel like weather. It felt like vacuum. Then, the radio crackled. It wasn't a voice. It was a scream. Rekindle, Lahaina Luna and the bypass. It's not spotting, Chief. It's exploding. Ventura grabbed his radio. Engine 1, Engine 6, roll out. Hit it hard. He didn't know yet that he wasn't sending them to a fire. He was sending them into a microwave oven. The Maelstrom, 3:30 p.m. The fire didn't spread. It consumed. Ventura stood at the command post, watching the drone feed until the drones melted. The fire was moving at 60 miles per hour. It wasn't burning the grass, it was vaporizing it. It's jumping whole blocks, Ventura yelled over the roar of the wind. Concrete doesn't burn like that. How is that possible? But it was burning. The 400-year-old historic district, the wooden storefronts of Front Street, the ancient banyan tree, the missionary homes was being erased. And then came the tornadoes. Ventura watched in horror as the heat rose so fast it punched a hole in the atmosphere. The incoming winds rushed to fill the void, creating spinning vortices of fire whirls that tore roofs off houses before incinerating them. Get the people out, Ventura screamed into the mic. Abandon the perimeter, just get bodies out. But the gridlocked streets were a trap. The power lines, snapped by the wind, or something heavier, lay across the roads like electric snakes. Cars were stalled. And then, the physics broke. Ventura watched a sedan catch fire. It didn't start in the engine block. The rims melted. The aluminum alloy turned to liquid silver, and pulled on the asphalt, while the tires were still intact. That's not fire, Ventura thought, his mind flashing to the classified briefings he'd ignored about directed energy. That's induction heating. That's a frequency weapon. The loss of Engine 1. Chief, we're trapped. It was the crew of Engine 1. They were caught in the bottleneck near Front Street. The fire was on 3 sides. The truck is dead. The air intake is melting. We're bailing out. Ventura gripped the table. Leave the rig. Get to the water. Mosier, get the SUV. Get them out. He listened to the chaos. The brave men of Engine 1, the pride of the West Side, had to abandon their fortress. The massive red fire engine, built to withstand hell, was being turned into a slag heap. Ventura closed his eyes. He imagined the $800,000 machine glowing cherry red, its aluminum body panels dripping like wax. They are clearing the board, Ventura realized with a sick, cold certainty. They aren't just burning houses. They are burning the history. They are burning the resistance. The aftermath: midnight. The wind had finally died down. The town of Lahaina was gone. Not damaged, Gone. Ventura walked through the smoking ruins of Front Street. The silence was heavier than the wind had been. The only sound was the hiss of bursting pipes and the distant wail of a siren. He passed the shell of a seaside mansion. It was a pile of white ash. He passed a workforce housing complex. It was a pile of grey ash. The fire had not discriminated. Rich, poor, local, Howley, it had taken everything. He stopped at the seawall. The harbor was full of burnt hulls. Chief, a soot-covered firefighter approached him. It was Oggy, who had volunteered to help the lines. "We found something." "Bodies?" Ventura asked, dreading the answer. "No," Oggy whispered. "Survivors. But look at what survived." Oggy pointed to a single house standing amidst the blackened wasteland. It was untouched. The red roof was bright. The grass was green. "The blue roofs," Oggy murmured. "And the trees. Look at the trees, Chief. The wood is burnt, but the leaves are still green. How does a fire melt a car engine but leave a leaf unburnt?" Ventura looked at the anomaly. "I don't know, Oggy," Ventura said, taking off his helmet. "Wildfire. This was a reset. But I know one thing. This wasn't a..." He looked up at the smoky sky, where the Dark Star had cruised 2 years prior. "They burned the city to save the system," Ventura whispered. "But they missed the roots." Double quote. The Blue Frequency Glitch. The 8th of August, 2023, 1600 hours. Low Earth orbit, Leo, inclination 22 degrees. Aboard the USS Hilankota, Dark Fleet heavy cruiser. The massive triangular craft held a geosynchronous position directly above Maui. To the naked eye on the ground, it was invisible, cloaked not by darkness, but by an atmospheric mimicry shield that projected the perfect, cloudless azure of the daytime sky onto its ventral hull. Inside the Combat Information Center, CIC, the air was cool and smelt of ozone. Commander Viperstone looked at the tactical display. Target grid, Lahaina, Zone 1, Historic District. Weapon status, firing sequence complete. Energy output, 4.5 terawatts. Effect on target is absolute, the weapons officer reported, his voice devoid of emotion. The directed energy array functioned within 99% of simulation parameters. The 60 miles per hour winds from the hurricane provided excellent thermal masking. The ionization trail was dispersed instantly. Stone nodded. "And the ignition points?" "Multiple simultaneous ignitions," the officer confirmed. "We targeted the substations first to simulate an electrical failure. Then we walked the beam down Front Street. Vaporization of aluminum alloy engine blocks confirmed. The frequency was tuned to resonate with carbon and metal structures." Stone looked at the live optical feed. The town was a smudge of grey ash and black smoke. "It's done," Stone whispered. "The anomaly is cauterized." He knew why they were here. It wasn't about land development. It wasn't about the smart city. It was about a tweet. Flashback, the order. 2 weeks earlier, Skunke had stood in the control room at Site X, staring at the tweet from @Jason Grevis 808 on the giant screen. The sketch of the Dark Star mocked him. "He's right there," Skunke had raged, pointing at the map of Lahaina. "He's sitting in that grid, broadcasting our specs to the world. We mapped it with the green LiDAR last month. We know the terrain." "Sir," the mission controller had hesitated. "That's a populated area. The collateral damage." "The mission is security," Skunke snapped. "If the leak continues, the entire breakaway civilization is at risk. Target the grid. Burn the haste act to find the needle." Double quote. The anomaly. Back in the CIC, the weapons officer frowned. He was looking at the bomb damage assessment, BDA. Photos coming in from the drone fleet. "Commander," the officer said. "We have a glitch." "What kind of glitch?" Stone asked. "Look at the spectral analysis. The beam, it bounced." On the screen, amidst the sea of grey ash and melted cars, there were pristine islands of color. Blue roofs. Specifically, the cool blue pigment used on certain residential homes and the umbrella canopies of a few businesses. The frequency, The officer muttered, typing furiously. The DEW operates on a 650 nm wavelength to maximize heat transfer in red and brown pigments, but 450 nm blue, it reflects. Stone stared at the untouched blue houses. It was a physics error, a massive oversight in the weapon's calibration. They survive? Stone asked. Yes, sir. The laser slid right off them. It looks suspicious. It looks like a signature, Stone cursed. If people notice that only the blue things survived, they'll figure out it was a laser. Fire doesn't care about color. Light does. Double quote. The Spin Room. San Francisco X, formerly Twitter, HQ. L. Skunke's private office. L. Skunk watched the BDA on his encrypted laptop. He saw the blue roofs. He saw the anomaly. Sloppy, he hissed. Viper, you left fingerprints. He opened the admin console for X. Already, the algorithm was picking up chatter. People were posting pictures of the blue roofs. At Truthseeker 99, why did Oprah's blue roof survive? Why did the blue umbrellas not burn? At Maui Strong, direct energy weapon confirmed. Look at the color spectrum. Skunk's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He couldn't delete the pictures that would prove it. He had to recontextualize them. Adjust the algorithm, Skunk commanded the AI. Downrank directed energy weapon. Upprank climate change. Upprank invasive grasses. Upprank high winds. He paused. And trigger the bot swarm. If anyone mentions the blue roofs, flood the replies with ridicule. Call them conspiracy theorists. Make them sound insane. Say it was just luck or fire-resistant materials. He watched the real-time graph. The DEW trend line began to flatten as his bots swarmed the conversation, burying the truth under a mountain of noise. I own the town square, Skunk whispered, leaning back in his chair. Don't exist. Only the wind. And in my town, lasers. He looked at the map of the destroyed Lahaina. Jason is silent, Skunk noted, plugged. He's either dead, or he's running. Either way, the leak is. The Wall and the Banyan. The 21st of August, 2023. The edge of the burn zone, Lahaina, Maui. The air still smelled of wet ash and toxic plastic. The checkpoints were manned by the National Guard, but Jason Grevis didn't need a pass. He was already inside. His house, a small structure near the edge of town, had miraculously survived. The fire had stopped 10 feet from his property line, halted by a shift in the wind or perhaps a shift in the frequency. For 2 weeks, Jason had been a ghost. No power, no internet, just the sound of helicopters and the silence of a dead town. But today, the silence was broken. The motorcade. Jason stood on his lanai, hidden behind the surviving bougainvillea. He watched as the black SUVs and the armored limo of the President of the United States rolled past. They were heading for the historic banyan tree, the blackened, scarred heart of the town that had refused to die. Jason watched the Osprey helicopters circle overhead. He saw the snipers on the surviving roofs. They're touring the crime scene, Jason whispered to Angel, who stood beside him holding a warm bottle of water. But they don't know who the arsonist is. The president would give a speech about building back better. He would talk about resilience. He didn't know that the ground he was standing on had been cleared for a directed energy terminal. He was just the landlord inspecting a vacant lot, unaware that the developer, Vane, had already signed the lease. As the motorcade passed within meters of his driveway, Jason felt a strange vibration. Not the rumble of engines, but the hum of the portable jamming equipment in the convoy. They're afraid, Jason noted. They know the energy here is unstable. Double quote. The reconnection. 2 hours later. Jason's living room. The lights flickered. The router hummed. Connection restored. For the first time in 14 days, the data floodgates opened. Jason didn't check his bank account. He didn't check the news about the fire. He opened X, Twitter. The timeline exploded. While Lahaina had been burning, the world had been looking up. David Grush, Lou Elizondo, Ryan Graves. Jason watched the clips from the congressional hearing. He saw David Grush, a former intelligence officer with a jawline like a superhero, sitting under oath and saying the words that Jason had known for 20 years. Non-human biologics. Crash retrieval program. Double quote. Jason watched Ryan Graves, the F-18 pilot, describe the cubes inside spheres. "It's happening," Jason said, leaning closer to the screen. "The dam is breaking." He saw the faces of the congressmen, Luna, Burchett, AOC. They looked angry. They looked confused. They were demanding access to the SCIF. Sensitive compartmented information facility. They were demanding to see the bodies. But then, Jason saw the pushback. The headlines changed. Pentagon denies claims. Grush's medical records leaked. Congress denied access to Eglin AFB. Double quote. "There it is," Jason pointed at the screen. "The wall." Double quote. "The architect of the wall. Washington, D.C., the Deep State Archive. Subbasement Level 9. Vane sat in a room that didn't exist on the blueprints of the Capitol. He was watching the same hearings Jason was watching. He wasn't worried. He was managing. On his desk were 3 phones. One connected to the Pentagon press secretary. One connected to the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. One connected to El Skunk. "The pilot testimonies are emotional," Vane said into the first phone. "Let them talk. It makes them look like traumatized veterans. But Grush is dangerous. He speaks the language of the bureaucracy." Congressman Burchett is trying to invoke the Holman rule, the voice on the line panicked. "They want to defund the program." Vane laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound. "They can't defund a program they can't find," Vane said. "Move the assets. Take the bodies out of Wright-Patterson. Move the archetype craft to the Kwajalein Atoll. Bury it under the ocean. And the Maui node." "The fire did its job," Vane said, looking at a satellite map of the scorched earth in Lahaina. "Observers are scattered. The anomaly, Jason, is isolated without power." "Sir," the voice hesitated. "Jason's power was restored 40 minutes ago. He is online." Vane froze. He looked at the live data feed. He saw the connection. He saw Jason accessing the Grush testimony. "He's watching," Vane whispered. "Hearings are part of the same war." He's connecting the dots. He sees that the fire and the Vane hung up. He picked up the secure line to the Directorate. "The wall is holding," Vane reported. "But the pressure is building. We have the president in Maui distracting the public with empathy. We have the Pentagon denying the UFOs. But the physics are leaking." "What is your recommendation?" the Directorate asked. "We stop denying," Vane said, his eyes cold. "We start confusing, flood the zone with noise. Fake alien invasions, blue beam holograms, make the truth look so ridiculous that even the believers give up." Vane turned back to the screen, watching Jason's digital footprint light up again. "You can have your internet back, Jason," Vane murmured. "The static I'm about to create. But you'll never find the signal in the chronological fail-safe." The 25th of August, 2023. The Void Room Secure Virtual Meeting Space. Encrypted Quantum Entanglement Channel. The room had no walls. It was just a white, infinite expanse of digital silence. 2 avatars stood in the center. El Skunk, appearing as a sleek, chrome version of himself, was pacing furiously. The data stream around him was red, angry, jagged spikes of frustration. "I have the coordinates," Skunk shouted. "He's back in the house. The power is on. He's tweeting again. He's connecting the Lahaina fire to the directed energy program. He's validating Grush. Why are we playing games, Vane? I can have a rod from God kinetic impactor. Drop a tungsten telephone pole on his roof in 3 minutes. Problem solved." Double quote. Vane stood still. His avatar was a shadow, a silhouette of black static that seemed to absorb the light around it. "You are a mechanic, Skunk," Vane's voice resonated from everywhere at once. "You think in terms of nuts and bolts, action and reaction, but you do not understand the OS." Vane raised a hand. The white void darkened. a holographic projection of the timeline. Appeared, a glowing gold thread stretching from the Big Bang to the present moment. Jason isn't just a man in a truck, Vane hissed. He is the synchronizer. Vane pointed to a specific point on the golden thread. 2023. The Atlas is a timeship, Vane explained. It doesn't just travel through space, it anchors reality. And Jason, he is the key. His biosignature is the encryption key that keeps the timeline stable. Skunk stopped pacing. What does that mean? It means, Vane said, stepping closer, that if you kill him, time stops. Skunk blinked. You mean the mission fails? No, Vane corrected. I mean everything. The sun stops burning. The electrons stop spinning. The simulation we are living in, it detects a fatal error. User not found. And it performs a hard reset. Vane swiped his hand, showing a simulation of Jason's death. The moment the impactor hits the house, the screen goes black. The universe dissolves into code. Vane, Skunk, the money, the power, it all ceases to exist. We are parasites, Skunk, Vane whispered. We live on the back of the host. If we kill the host, we die instantly. The Atlas protects him not with shields, but with causality. Skunk stared at the simulation, the arrogance drained out of him. So we can't touch him? Skunk asked. We cannot use direct action, Vane clarified. We cannot use a bullet. We cannot use a bomb. The universe will simply jam the gun or the explosive. You saw the fire. It burned the whole town, but it skipped his house. That wasn't luck. That was the timeline protecting its asset. So what do we do? Skunk demanded. Just let him win. We let him fail, Vane smiled. It was a cruel, patient expression. He has free will, Vane continued. The system protects his life, but it does not protect his spirit. We can break him. We can starve him. We can isolate him. We can make him feel so small, so crazy, so utterly defeated that he chooses to walk away. Vane gestured to the timeline again. If he quits, if he abandons the mission of his own free will, then the key is transferred. The Atlas seeks a new pilot, and in that gap, in that moment of transfer, we can seize the ship. Vane turned to the Chrome oligarch. Call off the assassins, Skunk. Cancel the kinetic strike. We go back to psychological warfare. We make his life a living hell of bureaucracy, debt, and silence. We make him wish he was dead. That is how we win. Skunk nodded slowly. Entropy. We rot him from the inside. Exactly, Vane said, dissolving back into the static works for us. Time is on his side, but despair, the connection severed, the White Room collapsed. Skunk sat alone in his command chair in Texas. He cancelled the launch order. He opened Twitter. He typed a command to the algorithm, suppress hope. Chapter 36. The Soul Dredge. October, 2023. Altitude, 300 feet, cloak, location, residential grid, Kihei, Maui. Inside the sport model craft, the air did not smell like ozone or sterile plastic. It smelled like copper. It smelled like old blood and wet electricity. Unit 7 Zeta sat in the pilot's chair, which wasn't a chair, but a molded depression in the floor that interfaced directly with his spinal column. His large, black, almond-shaped eyes reflected the holographic display of the sleeping town below. He did not speak. He didn't need to. He shared a neural bandwidth with Unit 9 Beta, who was working in the rear compartment. Target acquired, Theta thought. Sector 4, female, REM cycle active, delta waves optimal. The craft, externally only 30 feet in diameter, defied Euclidean geometry on the inside. Through the application of tesseract folding, the interior was the size of a warehouse. Theta floated back into the collection bay. It was a gallery of horrors, organized with the cold efficiency of a supermarket. On the left, suspended in amber stasis fields, were the animal assets. A cow, missing its blood and sensory organs, laser cauterized. A sheep, dissected to study prion disease. On the right, the human assets. These were not whole bodies. They were parts, organs grown in unsuspecting hosts and harvested at night, a liver floating in nutrient gel, a spinal column, still twitching. But tonight's mission wasn't for meat, it was for software. Deploying consciousness siphon, Beta signaled. A beam of pale, green light, not a laser, but a tractor beam for the mind shot down from the craft, passing through the roof of a condo in Kiwi. It hit the sleeping woman. It didn't lift her body, it grabbed her astral form. Zeta watched the monitor. He saw the woman's consciousness being dragged up the beam, a shimmering, terrified ghost of data. She was in a nightmare, paralyzed, feeling the familiar weight on her chest. Extraction at 80%, Beta reported. She is resisting. Zeta narrowed his eyes. Increase the paralysis frequency, dampen the amygdala. Usually, the humans succumbed to fear. They froze. They allowed the Greys to take the samples, to tag the DNA, to wipe the memory. But recently, the herd had changed. On the screen, the woman's astral form suddenly glowed. It wasn't the white light of fear. It was the gold light of authority. In the dream state, the woman looked up at the Greys. She didn't scream for help. She didn't beg. She looked directly into the camera of the ship. I revoke consent, protection of the Atlas Protocol, her thought voice boomed, shaking the hull of the craft. I stand under the... She invoked the name. She didn't call for Jesus or Buddha. She called for the administrator. Alert. Zeta screamed telepathically. Ontological breach. The woman raised her hand in the dream. Access denied. Double quote. Snap. The sound inside the ship was like a whip cracking the sound barrier. The green beam shattered. The neural feedback loop slammed into Zeta and Beta like a sledgehammer. Zeta was thrown from the pilot divan. Beta collapsed, clutching his head as blue itcher leaked from his ear slits. The ship lurched, dropping 50 feet before the gravity drive compensated. The stasis fields flickered. The cow carcass swayed. The human organs bubbled in their jars. Connection severed, Zeta gasped, his mind reeling from the psychic backlash. She has the codes. She is awake. They scrambled back to the controls. The rip in the psychic fabric had blinded their senses. For the next hour, they were defenseless. If a human looked up now, they would see the ship. If a radar swept them, they would paint a target. Abort, Zeta signaled, his hands shaking on the console. Mark Sector 4 as Black Zone. They pushed the throttle. The sport model shot away, fleeing not from a missile, but from a thought. As they cleared the atmosphere, Zeta looked back at the island. The map was changing. There were more and more gold lights appearing in the dark. The humans were learning the defensive syntax. The pilot Jason has taught them how to lock the door, Zeta thought fearfully. The harvest is ending. The route access denial. May 2005. High orbit, geosynchronous hold. Interior of EBE Biological Survey Craft Vector 9. The interior of the craft did not smell like a hospital. It smelled like a wet battery, a sharp, metallic tang of ozone mixed with the musk of ammonia and the faint, coppery scent of dried blood. Unit 7 Zeta and Unit 9 Beta sat in the command indentations. There were no chairs, the floor itself, a warm, semi-biological polymer that felt like firm flesh, molded around their frail, childlike bodies. They were the Greys. Their skin was a damp, slate grey, glistening under the ambient violet light of the cabin. It wasn't skin so much as a containment suit for the fluids inside. Their heads were bulbous, oversized for their spindly necks, supported by the anti-gravity field of the ship. But it was the eyes that dominated the room. Large, obsidian teardrops that wrapped around the sides of their skulls. They didn't blink. Occasionally, a nictitating membrane, a second, translucent eyelid would slide across horizontally to moisten the surface. Zeta wore a neural monocle over his left eye, a sliver of silver tech that drilled directly into his temple, overlaying the ship's telemetry onto his vision. Beta's fingers, long and spindly with 4 digits ending in suction pad sensors, hovered over a console that had no buttons. only floating holographic glyphs. Reviewing target failure, Sita projected. His voice was a series of clicks and static in the mind. On the main screen, a curved wall of liquid crystal, the biosignatures of Jason Greversan. Angel appeared. They were glowing with a hostile, golden aura. Analysis, Beta responded, his hands dancing in the light. The male subject Jason. Incident log, Street. Kits, 2014. The screen replayed the memory file extracted from Jason's subconscious. It showed a dark room in the Caribbean, the tropical heat, the paralysis setting in, Jason floating above his bed, the tractor beam locking onto his chest. Then, the disruption. Jason didn't panic. He accessed a dormant code. Jehovah. In the simulation, the sound wave of the name hit the Grey abduction team like a physical shockwave. The tractor beam dissolved. The ship's navigation computer crashed. The Greys were forced to drop him, hard, back onto the mattress to avoid a total system failure. The name is a kill switch, Sita noted, tapping his temple interface. It invokes the source administrator. It creates a firewall we cannot breach. Compare with female subject Angel, Beta signaled. Incident log, Europe, 2008. The screen shifted. A cold apartment in Berlin or Prague. The same paralysis. The same beam. Angel, terrified but lucid, realized the intrusion. She didn't scream. She engaged the same protocol. I belong to the Most High. Double quote. Flash. The screen went white. The feedback loop burned out the recording drone. Sita leaned back, his small, slit mouth twitching in irritation. The dyad is sealed, Sita concluded. Individually, they were difficult. Together, they are a fortress. Their biofields resonate at a frequency that dissolves our tech. He looked around the lab. The walls of the ship pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. On the shelves, the harvest of the night was stored in silence. A glass cylinder held a cross-section of a cow's udder, the laser cuts precise and cauterized. Another cylinder held a human-extracted nervous system, floating in yellow nutrient gel, still firing electrical impulses, a stolen dream. We have enough biological material, Beta signaled, sensing Zeta's frustration. The sheep, the cattle, the unaware humans. But we need the engineer, Zeta countered, staring at the golden image of Jason. The masters, the syndicate stroke vein, require his codes. They want to know how he bypassed the dampener. Zeta reached for a tool on the console, a psionic amplifier. It looked like a tuning fork made of black glass. He tried to tune it to Jason's frequency. Spark. A bolt of blue electricity jumped from the console and bit Zeta's hand. He hissed, retracting his fingers. Access denied, the ship's AI intoned, not in a voice, but in a vibration that shook the floor. Target is under sovereign protection. Further attempts will result in permanent disconnection. Zeta rubbed his burnt hand. The smell of singed grey flesh filled the cockpit. Mark them, Zeta ordered, his black eyes narrowing. Do not abduct. Do not engage. Just watch. They are no longer livestock, Beta agreed, turning the ship away from the island. They are predators. The saucer tilted on its axis. The silent engine hummed, and the craft dissolved into the star field, leaving the sleeping couple in Lahaina untouched, guarded by a name that was older than the stars themselves. End Part 3.